Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar about the day-to-day management of the Vienna Agreement between CEN and ISO. So, as usual, you will be muted during this webinar, but you have the possibility to enter your questions in the Q&A panel of the webinar. So, as much as possible, we will try to reply the answers after the presentation. Should you be on social media, you're always free to post something about this webinar with the hashtag 1010webinar. So let me leave the floor now to the speaker of today. His name is Gonzalo, and he's the customer service specialist for manufacturing here at the CEN Management Center. So please, Gonzalo, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So I will guide you through the presentation and this explanation about the day-to-day management of the Vienna Agreement. In terms of the presentation, I will cover these 6 points. So the Vienna Agreement basics, the objective and basic principles, the modalities of the Vienna Agreement, the day-to-day management will be the focus of our presentation, and what are the key learning points. So in terms of the Vienna Agreement, so very basically, so it's a formal agreement between ISO and CEN. Original signature in 1991, there was a codified version in 2001. In 2016, it's the latest version of the guidelines on the implementation, where some of the aspects of the implementation of the Vienna Agreement are already covered. And the main objective of the Vienna Agreement is essentially to avoid duplication of international work and the European level. As you can see in the figures, in the current catalog of European standards, so 67% they have no relation, so 32% are identical to ISO publications. In the yearly production at the moment, we are rather around the 40% of work in parallel with ISO, so there is a growing, I would say, interface with ISO in the European work. The basic objective of the Vienna Agreement is essentially to the commitment from ISO and CEN members to primarily take over the work at international level. There is the focus also on the rational use of resources and not to duplicate the structure of the work. We also foresee in the Vienna Agreement the specific needs of the CEN system in terms, for instance, of the single European market. And the idea is also to focus all the efforts in order to achieve a fast development of the necessary standards to access the market. The basic principles of the Vienna Agreement are around the technical cooperation between both organizations. As I referred before, there is this recognition of the European system and of the current system in place in the EEA and the need to cooperate between the other European standardization organizations. There is the possibility to transfer the work from CEN to ISO, which is of course not an automatic process. Anyway, there is a process of consensus in both organizations that are synchronized, and also the approval processes of the documents. And also highly important is that CEN also assumes the responsibility to deal with the comments from the non-CEN ISO members. Now, in terms of the modalities of the Vienna Agreement, in a nutshell, those are the main aspects. So there is the information exchange between ISO, ECS, and CCMC. There is the possibility to have cooperation by correspondence, representation in meetings, and to adopt publications from each other organization. And of course, the main focus of the Vienna Agreement is rather on the parallel development of common deliverables. And in a way, the day-to-day management is focusing on these two last points, the adoption of available publications, and the main focus is actually the parallel development of common deliverables. So the day-to-day management is not yet available in CEN BOSS, but we will finalize it together with ISO CS, and in the coming weeks it should be available in CEN BOSS. But the document has been, in its sense, has been agreed by the technical board by decision BTC 130/2019 in end of August 2019. So the document is approved, and that's why we are going to present you the main features of this revised version of the day-to-day management. The document foresees the six main parts, so the development and approval of publications in parallel, the maintenance of publications, synchronization of procedures. There is an element on other deliverables, provisions for translations, and any other aspect that is not covered in the previous part. So we start with part one, which is the main focus of this day-to-day management, is the biggest part. So is how do we actually deal with the development of publications in parallel? So first of all, there is a basic principle that SENS and ALEC Management Center and the ISO CS are exchanging mutually the work programs, and overall the development of European standards and international standards coordinate the information. As I referred before, there are the Vienna Agreement guidelines that already define the procedures for the mutually agreed parallel work. So this is also a document that can also be used when working in parallel to get some information. Then it's up to the ISO committee manager and the SEN committee secretary to ensure that a new work item is created and can be developed under the Vienna Agreement. Of course, highlighting who is going to take the lead. This is also an important aspect for coordination. In a way, revision and amendments under the Vienna Agreement there is a more automated system of registration by CCMC. Anyway, in line with the decision from the technical board in 1993, we informed the technical committee secretary that the new work item has been created in ISO, and that we are also creating the work item at European level. By default, this project should have the ISO lead preferred option, of course, and it should be clear whenever SEN is intended to take the lead of the project. In respect of adoption of existing standards, in part 6 of the presentation, we'll come back to this point. So, once the document has been approved, so the work item has been approved in ISO and in SEN, the technical committees have prepared the version, so then there is the first step of the submission to inquiry or to the parallel this vote. So in respect of the task as such, it's up to the committee manager, secretary of the lead committee, to provide the documents to ISO CS. It's important to highlight that all the documents in parallel are managed and edited by ISO CS, so CCMC as such doesn't do the editing of those documents. So ISO is the main interface for provision of documents. So ISO then, when receiving the document, prepares the English version and informs the dates of the vote. So this means informing their members, CCMC, and then we also inform our members at the dates of the vote. When the document is ready by ISO CS, there is a 8-week translation period, and also CCMC informs DIN to provide the German translation. As you may be aware, so ISO prepares the English version, and together with French and Russian, the official languages, they will ask AFNOR to provide the translation version. So the next step is then the inquiry, so the official inquiry, and we have a 12 weeks ballot, so both at ISO level and at European level in SEN. ISO members are providing the vote in the ISO portal. SEN members are supposed to provide the vote in the SEN balloting application. So it's extremely important for everyone to understand that we are running the process in parallel, but at the same time, there are two different processes, and this is extremely important. In terms of the dates, there is a short note in terms of the 12 weeks. There are, in a few occasions, some delay in the starting of the inquiry on the SEN side, but the closing of the ballot usually takes place at the same time. Now, during this, as an outcome of this inquiry or this vote, both of organizations will have access to the documents, the results, and the comments provided by both organizations and both members. And it's up to the ISO and SEN committee leadership to assess the comments. So it's extremely important that there's also technical coordination between both technical committees in ISO and in SEN to ensure that the intended input coming from the comments and the votes is informing both organizations. Of course, if there are no technical changes, ISO, as part of their procedures, follows to publication, skipping the FDs. In SEN, we still need to have a technical committee decision to skip the formal vote. If you want to know more information about the background of this process, so decision BT 12/2018 is a decision that highlights the process of dealing with parallel work and foresees that for a parallel work with the SEN-TC, we still need to take this decision. Then, moving on, sorry, we have the submission to the final text to vote, or the ISO FDs. In terms of process of submission of the documents, we are essentially talking about the same. So the process is the same for the inquiry. I think it's also important to note that ISO has some criteria for the submission requirements of the documents. That there is a link in the presentation that you were able to follow and to see. Then at the formal vote, FDs, ISO-CS prepares the text in the English version and then makes it available for translation and vote. CCMC informs the members of the formal vote dates and circulates the German version when applicable, when she's available. And then we have the parallel vote of 8 weeks. In a way, like I referred for the inquiry, the same can apply. So if there is a short delay between the start of the two ballots, the ballot anyway will close at the same time. ISO members, as for the inquiry, provide their vote in the ISO portal, send members in the SEN balloting application. At the end of this process, it is up to the ISO committee manager and to the SEN secretary also to circulate the outcome of the ballot to the respective technical committees. Then we get to the finalization part of the document. As I informed before, ISO-CS is responsible for the finalization and eventually will take the necessary editorial changes in contact with the project leader and the technical committee secretary or manager. At the end of this process, there is a verification step with the technical committee manager or secretary. And at this moment, we also inform the non-lead technical committee of the final text. So this is something that has been also clarified now with this revision of day-to-day management, is that the non-lead TC should be informed of the final version of the text. In a way, this is also important to ensure that there is a good coordination between both technical committees. Then, as a next step, ISO Central Secretary notifies the date of the publication and publishes the document. On the SEN side, CCMC then makes available the EN ISO title page, the European forward, and when applicable, also the Annex Z and the German translation. So, to be completely clear, whenever we circulate documents to our members, we never circulate the ISO text. So members need to go through the ISO system to get access to the documents. So we only provide the European elements in a way. Of course, in respect of the development of work items in parallel, there is always the possibility to have standards supporting European directives and regulations. So the day-to-day management includes also an important part on how to deal with this parallel work. So as a basic step, is also important for the technical committee leadership to ensure that the links to directives and standardization requests are correct. Also, as I informed, if we are talking about a revision process, we also should take into consideration whether this is still applicable or not. So this is extremely important. And I would say from the technical side, is also extremely important the need to liaise and communicate to the leadership body the need for the next day, in case this is, for instance, ISO lead for the technical work. Because it still remains a responsibility from the European side to deal with the harmonization elements. In terms of CCMC responsibilities in this process, so whenever there is the ISO CD stage, ISO circulates a ballot, ISO CD ballot, at this moment in time, we can use this opportunity to request an as assessment. So as a first working draft, we can ask for the as assessment. So of course, in this situation, the technical committee needs to request using the transmission notice to have this indicative first working draft assessment. When we move to the ISO stage, so CCMC submits the text to the as assessment, and of course, as you may be aware, the text prepared by ISO includes during the development phase the Annex Z, which will not happen in the finalization of the document. At the FD stage, CCMC also provides the request for the assessment, and at this moment this is somehow in parallel with the FDs, and of course there is a risk that if the assessment is not compliant, we will end up with the need to assess what are the next steps, and this is something that I'm going to cover in the next 2 slides. Of course, what is extremely important also related to this is that for this stage and for the FT stage, together with the comments from the ballot provided by the members, also the as assessment will also be included to the outcome of the ballot. The only exception is for the ISO CD stage, where there is no ballot on European level, so we have to provide the assessment to the technical committee. Now, as I said, when we are talking about harmonized standards, there are several possibilities at the moment in case we have a compliance assessment or a lack of compliance or partial compliance assessment at the FT's formal vote. So if there is a compliance assessment, everything goes well, and both ISO and CEN publish under the Vienna Agreement. If, on the other hand, we have a partial or a lack of compliance assessment, it's extremely important that so the leadership of the technical committees together with CCMC, ISO CS to ensure and discuss that one of the following options is taken. So the first one is when we have a partial lack of compliance, but most of these comments somehow are considered editorial, and very often some of these comments are also linked with Annex Z, so which is not in the ISO text. So in this case, there is the possibility for ISO to publish under the Vienna Agreement without any modification, because in the main body of the text there are no changes, but it could be that we need to change the Annex Z, and then we need to go through the technical board to request the changes in the text and the finalization of it. So in this case, we would still have the document published under the Vienna Agreement. The second option is when we cannot solve the comments and we need to modify the text, then there are the possibility for CEN and ISO to publish the deliverable, but not as a harmonized deliverable. So there are a few cases where this has happened. So we had an assessment at formal vote, it's lack of compliance, it's too difficult to solve it on a short term. So both TCs agree that we publish in ISO and in CEN, but at this moment in time, then we remove the harmonization elements. We still have 2 other options. So the third one is, again, when we have to deal with the technical comments to solve the problem. So, and then in this case, if both committees' leadership agree, they can ask to have a second FTs and a second formal vote. So in ISO, this is actually through the committee resolution. In CEN, we need to go through the technical board to allow this possibility. But in this case, what would happen is that we would have a second formal vote FTs for this text. Finally, the remaining option is actually the decoupling from the Vienna Agreement. In a way, of course, this is not the preferred solution because it's not in the spirit of the Vienna Agreement, but it may be that this is the only possibility that we have, and ISO wants to go ahead and publish the document, and CEN still wants to solve the problem. So, of course, then we need to decouple, and the next steps will need to be clarified whether ISO would would be possible to deal with some of the changes in a future amendment or something like that. But this is, at this moment in time, for this specific work item, there will be a decoupling from the Vienna Agreement. Now, if we move on, the day-to-day management as a part 2, which is essentially dealing with the maintenance of publications. And I would say the maintenance is essentially through amendments, so ISO or SEN lead, and in a way the process to follow up is essentially the same. So we'd have to create a new work item, and we'd follow essentially the same process as described above. We also have the possibility of minor revisions, which should or shall only deal with editorial changes. ISO has a process called minor revisions. In SEN, this follows a normal SEN inquiry of 12 weeks, and there is a parallel ISO FT's vote of 12 weeks. If it's positive, then we move on and publish it as well. In terms of correction, so there is the corrected version from ISO or SEN lead, but it's ISO CS that is handling these corrections. Once accepted and available, ISO confirms to CCMC, and we also communicate to our members. In terms of the synchronization of procedures, there are sometimes some challenges because the work item is not necessarily created at the same time, so there is the possibility to try to catch up. So the possibilities are the following. So to carry the inquiry in parallel, but of course in this case one of the organizations may need to wait. There is also a possibility to have a second inquiry, and then will be in parallel. And there is even a third option of trying to have an independent inquiry and trying to have the formal vote together. However, it's extremely challenging to manage and to ensure that we are all talking about the same document. And therefore, one of the recommendations in this case is from the day-to-day management is actually that if we end up too late to be together in the Vienna Agreement, the best way forward is actually to deal with the adoption possibility, as we will cover it in part 6. Concerning the other deliverables in the framework of the day-to-day management and the Vienna Agreement, we have technical specification and technical reports under ISO or SEN lead. It's an exceptional process, so we need to go to technical board to accept the decision to have a parallel work for a TS and a technical report, because there is no relevance we need to justify the relevance of this parallel work. There are also some differences. So the ISO committee has a vote via the ISO balloting application, and in SEN we have a normal vote on the TS under the SEN balloting application. We also provide the German translation for the TSs, and there is a 12 weeks vote for this case, both for TSs and TRs. Extremely important as well, if we imply or if we need to have technical changes after this vote, in SEN we need to have a TC decision requesting these changes, and a second formal vote also needs to be requested through BT decision, which is of course not ideal. The day-to-day management also foresees the development of guides in parallel with ISO lead, but those are very exceptional, and I do not recall having one in the last few years. Getting very close to the end of the webinar, there is one provision in part 5 that is to give some information about the translations. So at the inquiry stage, which I somehow already covered, we have the English text available by ISO-CS. AFTNOR and DINA request to provide translations within 8 weeks. At the formal vote stage, ISO-CS again provides the English text and gives 2 weeks for translation. And as an outcome of these 2 weeks, it starts the ballot. There is also an exceptional situation where you can extend translation, but those are very exceptional in ISO. At the publication stage, so DIN, on the same side, DIN aligns the German text after the publication from ISO-CS, and CCMC have communicated this. ISO-CS, of course, finalizes the English and the first versions, and once we have all the documents, ISO-CS communicates the date to CCMC, DIN, and AFTNOR. Finally, the last part of the day-to-day management are any other Vienna Agreement aspects. So So the parts covered are, for instance, the systematic review of standards. So it's important for everyone to be aware that SEN does not carry systematic review of the Vienna Agreement items. So it's ISO that is dealing with that. Of course, SEN can always suggest to ISO to revise a standard, so which is a completely different story. In terms of the adoption of ISO deliverables by SEN, so it's a similar process. We need to have a new work item adopting this ISO publication, could be through TC or BT, depending on the deliverable. And then we follow the normal inquiry process. And if it's positive, then we could go ahead to publication. And in this case, we don't need a TC decision. So this is a relatively straightforward process. Of course, on the other hand, so ISO can also request the adoption of SEN publications, and usually the process that is used is the fast track procedure. So finally, to conclude the key learning points of this session, so I think it's extremely important to highlight that we are only under the Vienna Agreement once both active work items exist in both organizations. So very often there is the sensation or the impression that we are under the Vienna Agreement, but only one of the organizations has created the work item. So of course, in that situation, we are not under the Vienna Agreement. It is extremely important to have a good coordination between ISO and SEN committees leadership to coordinate technical aspects. And of course, moreover, when we are talking about harmonized standards. In terms of the SEN-TC leadership, there is also this responsibility to focus on the harmonization matters, Annex Z, handling of us consultant comments. So this is extremely important for technical bodies to take into consideration. One of the added values of this day-to-day management were these 4 options to handle parallel work when we have lack of compliance. So this was something that was technical bodies were struggling somehow, and now these options are there, so can give some guidance and what are the ways to follow. It's also extremely important to highlight that in some cases, BT decisions may be necessary. Talking about, for instance, the creation of technical specifications work items, technical changes after the vote. So this is something for you to take into account. And finally, ISO CS and CCMC databases are updated on the basis of mutual exchange of information, and we keep close contact to ensure that all the parallel work items are correctly marked in the different databases.